Saturday mornings in 1973 meant one thing: gathering around the television with a bowl of cereal to watch your favorite superheroes save the world. Super Friends brought together the Justice League in a way that introduced an entire generation to DC's greatest heroes. But behind those colorful animated adventures lies a fascinating story of creative decisions, behind-the-scenes drama, and unexpected legacies. These are 10 surprising facts you didn't know about Super Friends from 1973. Fact 10: Hanna-Barbera almost didn't get the show. When DC Comics decided to bring their superheroes to Saturday morning television, Hanna-Barbera wasn't the obvious choice. Filmation, the studio behind the Superman or Aquaman Hour of Adventure and the Batman or Superman Hour, seemed like the natural fit. They'd been producing DC superhero cartoons since 1966 and had established relationships with the comic book company. Filmation had the experience, the track record, and most importantly, they understood how to handle superhero properties with the right balance of action and drama. But CBS, the network that would air Super Friends, had a strong partnership with Hanna-Barbera, who were dominating Saturday morning ratings with shows like Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, and The Flintstones. The network executives knew Hanna-Barbera's production system inside and out. They knew the studio could deliver episodes on time and on budget, something that mattered enormously in the fast-paced world of Saturday morning television. The network executives pushed hard for Hanna-Barbera to get the contract, believing their production style and proven track record with younger audiences made them the better choice. They also knew that Hanna-Barbera had perfected the art of limited animation, a technique that kept costs down while still delivering entertaining shows. This was crucial because Saturday morning budgets were notoriously tight. DC was initially hesitant, concerned that Hanna-Barbera's approach might be too comedic for their flagship heroes. They'd seen how Hanna-Barbera handled action in shows like Jonny Quest and the Herculoids, which were more lighthearted than DC wanted for Superman and Batman. There were meetings where DC representatives expressed worry that their heroes might end up with the same treatment as Yogi Bear or Fred Flintstone. But William Hanna and Joseph Barbera personally pitched their vision for the show, emphasizing they would treat the characters with respect while making them accessible to children. They brought concept art that showed serious, heroic versions of the Justice League members. They talked about their understanding that these weren't just cartoon characters, but American icons who needed to be handled with dignity. They promised that while the show would be appropriate for children, it wouldn't talk down to them or make the heroes into jokes. The pitch worked. They won the contract in early 1972, and production began immediately to meet the fall 1973 premiere date. The timeline was incredibly tight. The studio had to design all the characters, create the Hall of Justice and other settings, cast the voice actors, write 16 episodes, and complete all the animation in less than 18 months. It was a massive undertaking that required Hanna-Barbera to put some of their best talent on the project. This decision would shape superhero animation for decades to come. Hanna-Barbera's distinctive animation style, limited though it was by modern standards, became the visual language through which millions of children would first encounter Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. The way the characters moved, the way the scenes were framed, even the way action sequences were staged all established conventions that would influence superhero cartoons well into the 1980s and beyond. Fact 9. Wonder Woman nearly got cut from the lineup. In the early 1970s, Wonder Woman's inclusion in Super Friends was actually controversial within the network. CBS executives worried that having a female superhero as one of the core team members might not appeal to their target audience of young boys. They suggested replacing her with Green Lantern or The Flash, heroes they believed would be more marketable. Carmine Infantino, who was DC's publisher at the time, fought hard to keep Wonder Woman in the show. He argued that the character had been a best-selling comic book hero for over 30 years and deserved her place alongside Superman and Batman. He also pointed out that excluding the only major female superhero would send the wrong message. The Ms. magazine had recently put Wonder Woman on their cover in 1972, sparking renewed interest in the character as a feminist icon. Hanna-Barbera supported keeping Wonder Woman, partly because they recognized the importance of female representation and partly because they'd already begun character designs. In the end, Wonder Woman stayed, making Super Friends one of the few Saturday morning action shows of that era to feature a prominent female hero. Her presence in the show introduced countless young girls to their first action hero who looked like them. Fact 8. The Junior Super Friends were added because of Scooby-Doo. Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog weren't in the original concept for Super Friends. The show was initially supposed to focus solely on the Justice League members, working together to fight threats too big for any single hero. The pitch documents from early 1972 show no teenage characters or animal sidekicks. It was meant to be a straightforward superhero team show, but CBS executives, looking at their Saturday morning ratings, insisted that Hanna-Barbera add teenage characters to the lineup. They'd seen huge success with Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, which had premiered in 1969 and was still one of their highest-rated shows. The formula of teenage mystery solvers with a dog had proven enormously popular with the target demographic. The network believed that kids related better to characters closer to their own age than to adult superheroes. The executives presented Hanna-Barbera with research showing that children stayed more engaged with shows that had peer-age characters they could imagine themselves as. Superman was inspiring, but he was also alien and impossibly powerful. Batman was brilliant, but he was also a billionaire with endless resources. The network wanted characters who felt more accessible, more like the kids watching at home. Hanna-Barbera created Wendy Harris and Marvin White as junior members of the Super Friends, along with Wonder Dog as their canine companion. The character designs went through several iterations. Early sketches showed them in more colorful superhero-style outfits, but these were rejected as making them look too much like sidekicks. The final designs featured casual 1970s clothing, making them look like regular teenagers who happened to work with superheroes. The names were intentional references to William Hanna and Joseph Barbera's own first names, though they'd later deny this was deliberate in interviews. But the connection was obvious to anyone who knew the founders' names. Marvin wore glasses, just like Joseph Barbera often did. This was Hanna-Barbera's way of putting themselves into the Super Friends universe, even if they never admitted it publicly. These characters were meant to be audience surrogates, young people the viewers could relate to more easily than godlike heroes. Wendy and Marvin would ask questions that the audience might have, be impressed by the hero's powers, and sometimes get into trouble that required rescuing. They weren't heroes themselves, but they were learning from the best. The DC Comics writers hated this addition. They felt it diminished the seriousness of the Justice League and turned the show into just another Hanna-Barbera comedy with teenagers and a dog. There were heated meetings where DC representatives argued that the Justice League didn't need junior members, that the whole point of the league was that these were the greatest heroes working together. Adding inexperienced teenagers undermined that concept. But the network wouldn't budge, and Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog became permanent fixtures of that first season. The compromise was that these characters would never actually fight villains directly. They would help with research, operate equipment in the Hall of Justice, and occasionally provide information, but they wouldn't engage in combat. This satisfied DC's concerns about protecting the integrity of the heroes while giving CBS the teenage characters they wanted. Interestingly, these characters never appeared in the comic books and existed solely in the animated universe, making them unique to television history. DC had opportunities to bring them into the comics, but chose not to, feeling they didn't fit the tone of the Justice League stories they were telling in print. Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog remain pure television creations, artifacts of a specific moment in Saturday morning programming. Fact 7. Norman Alden voiced Aquaman while going through a divorce. Norman Alden, the voice actor who brought Aquaman to life in Super Friends, was going through one of the most difficult periods of his personal life during production. He and his wife were in the middle of a contentious divorce, and he was fighting for custody of his children. Voice actors who worked alongside him remembered that he would sometimes have to take breaks between recording sessions to call his lawyer or deal with court papers. Despite his personal turmoil, Alden delivered one of the most memorable voice performances in the series. His Aquaman had a distinctive quality, strong but compassionate, heroic but accessible. He brought a warmth to the character that made the underwater hero relatable despite his exotic origin. Alden would later say in interviews that working on Super Friends actually helped him through that dark time, giving him something positive to focus on when everything else in his life felt like it was falling apart. Alden continued voice acting work throughout the 1970s and 1980s, but Aquaman remained one of his most recognized roles. He attended comic conventions later in life and was always moved by how many fans told him his Aquaman was their first introduction to the character. He passed away in 2012 at age 87, leaving behind a legacy in animation history. Fact 6. The show was almost canceled after 12 episodes. Super Friends premiered on September 8, 1973, and initially struggled to find its audience. The ratings for the first few episodes were disappointing, hovering below CBS's expectations. By the time the 12th episode aired, network executives were seriously considering canceling the show and replacing it with something else in the January schedule. What saved Super Friends was merchandising. Even though the television ratings were soft, toy sales were exploding. Mego had launched a line of Super Friends action figures, and they were flying off store shelves. Retailers were calling the network to tell them kids were asking for Super Friends products. CBS realized they had a hit on their hands, just not in the traditional rating sense. The network decided to let the show finish its first season run of 16 episodes and then greenlit a second season. This decision proved prescient. By the second season in 1974, the ratings had improved significantly as word of mouth spread. Super Friends became the cornerstone of CBS's Saturday morning lineup, eventually running in various incarnations until 1986. Had the network pulled the plug after those first 12 episodes, superhero animation history would look very different. Fact 5. The Hall of Justice didn't exist in the comics. The Hall of Justice, that iconic building where the Super Friends gathered and planned their missions, was created specifically for the television show. In the DC Comics of that era, the Justice League met in a satellite headquarters orbiting Earth, which they'd been using since 1970. But Hanna-Barbera felt that a space station was too removed from everyday life and wouldn't give them the visual storytelling opportunities they wanted. The production design team created the Hall of Justice as a grand neoclassical building that looked like it could sit on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. They wanted something that felt official and important, but also welcoming and accessible. The mountain backdrop and the surrounding grounds gave them space for outdoor scenes and vehicle launches. The Hall of Justice became so iconic that DC Comics eventually brought it into the official comic book continuity. It first appeared in the comics in the late 1970s and has since become a permanent fixture of the DC universe. This is a rare case of the television adaptation influencing the source material rather than the other way around. The building has appeared in countless comics, video games, and other DC media, but it all started with Super Friends in 1973. Fact 4. Danny Dark was recording Superman while working full-time in advertising. Danny Dark, who provided the voice of Superman, wasn't a full-time voice actor when Super Friends began. He was actually a successful advertising executive working at a major firm in Los Angeles. Voice acting was his side job, something he did for extra money and because he enjoyed it. He'd recorded commercials and done some cartoon work, but Super Friends was his first major series regular role. Dark had to record his Superman dialogue early in the mornings or during lunch breaks because he couldn't take time off from his advertising job. Hanna-Barbera was accommodating because they loved his voice, but it created scheduling challenges. Sometimes the other actors would record their parts of scenes, and Dark would come in days later to record Superman's lines separately. His distinctive baritone became the sound of Superman for millions of children. Dark brought a sincerity and earnestness to the character that made Superman feel trustworthy and noble without being stiff or unapproachable. He continued voicing Superman through various Super Friends iterations while simultaneously maintaining his advertising career. He also became famous as the voice of Budweiser commercials, with his tagline delivery of "This Bud's for You" becoming one of the most recognized voices in American advertising. Dark passed away in 2004, but his Superman remains definitive for an entire generation. Fact 3. The show's educational content was mandated by the FCC. Super Friends wasn't just an action show. If you watch the episodes, you'll notice they frequently include educational content about science, ecology, health, and social issues. This wasn't an artistic choice by Hanna-Barbera, it was required by federal regulations. In 1972, the Federal Communications Commission issued new guidelines for children's television programming, requiring shows to include educational content. Networks and production companies scrambled to adapt their shows to meet these requirements. Super Friends incorporated this mandate by having the heroes teach lessons about everything from recycling to nutrition to historical events. Some episodes featured the Super Friends directly addressing the camera to explain scientific concepts. Others built educational content into the plots, like episodes about protecting endangered species or learning about different cultures. The Trouble Alert computer system in the Hall of Justice often provided information that was educational rather than just plot relevant. Writers found this requirement frustrating at times because it disrupted the flow of action stories. But the show's producers took it seriously, hiring educational consultants to ensure the information presented was accurate. Looking back, this mandate actually gave Super Friends a depth that pure action shows lacked. An entire generation learned basic science and social concepts from these Saturday morning adventures. Fact 2. Shannon Farnon replaced a pregnant actress mid-season. Shannon Farnon, who became the iconic voice of Wonder Woman in Super Friends, wasn't the original actress cast for the role. Recording for the first season began with a different actress whose name has been lost to history. About 5 episodes into production, that actress discovered she was pregnant and had to leave the show due to complications that required bed rest. Hanna-Barbera needed a replacement immediately because they were already behind schedule. Shannon Farnon, who'd done voice work for other Hanna-Barbera productions, came in for an audition and was hired that same day. She had to quickly record lines for episodes that were already partially completed, matching the tone and delivery of the previous actress so the transition wouldn't be jarring. Farnon brought her own interpretation to Wonder Woman, giving the character a warmth and strength that made her memorable. She understood Wonder Woman as both a warrior and a compassionate hero, someone who chose peace when possible but never backed down from necessary conflict. Her Wonder Woman inspired young viewers, both girls and boys, showing them that heroism came in different forms. Farnon continued voicing Wonder Woman through multiple seasons of Super Friends and became so associated with the character that she was regularly invited to DC Comics events. She remained active in voice acting and animation throughout her career, but Wonder Woman was always the role fans remembered her for most. Fact 1. The theme song was recorded in one take by a Canadian band. The Super Friends theme song, that instrumental fanfare that signaled adventure was about to begin, has an interesting origin story. Hanna-Barbera commissioned composer Hoyt Curtin, who'd created themes for most of their shows, to write the music. Curtin delivered a rousing, heroic theme that captured the spirit of the Justice League. For the recording, the music was performed by a group of Canadian session musicians who happened to be in Los Angeles working on another project. The band consisted of 10 musicians, and they recorded the theme in a single take. Curtin had arranged the music for a larger ensemble, but budget constraints meant working with whoever was available at the studio that day. The musicians improvised some of the horn flourishes during that one take, adding elements that weren't in Curtin's original arrangement. Those spontaneous additions became part of the iconic sound. The cymbal crash at the beginning, which became the sonic signature of the show, was actually a mistake. The percussionist came in early, but Curtin loved how it sounded and kept it. That one-take recording became one of the most recognizable theme songs in television history. It's been sampled, referenced, and parodied countless times. The theme was so successful that Curtin barely had to modify it for later seasons of Super Friends and its various spin-offs. What started as a quick budget session recording became a piece of American pop culture. Super Friends wasn't just a cartoon. It was a cultural phenomenon that shaped how an entire generation understood heroism, teamwork, and doing the right thing. These stories behind the scenes remind us that creating something meaningful often involves overcoming obstacles, making compromises, and sometimes getting lucky with spontaneous decisions. The show ran for 13 years in various forms, introduced millions of children to DC's greatest heroes, and established animation traditions that continue today. If these facts brought back memories of Saturday mornings past, do us a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got more nostalgic deep dives coming your way, exploring the shows and stories that made our childhood special. Thanks for watching, and remember, meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice,